Orpheus is the initial persona of Makoto Yuki and Kotone Shiomi, the main protagonists of Persona 3. With Persona 3 Reload officially out, now is the perfect time to talk about the history of the mythological Orpheus and what he means to the Persona series, and Persona 3 in specific. Before we continue, if you want to see more Megami Tensei content, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you like what you learned about Orpheus, then be sure to tell me in the comments what other personas or shadows or demons you'd like to see me discuss. Orpheus was a Greek bard and poet, supposedly son of Ogarus, king of Thrace, and Calliope, the muse of epic poetry and leader of the Muses. That lineage gave him musical capabilities far beyond any other mortal man. Orpheus is the first hero listed in the Argonautica to sail alongside Jason in his quest for the Golden Fleece, taking his place in the crossover episode of Greek mythology. Orpheus helped throughout the tale, using his music to calm the Argonauts when they fought, give rhythm to the ship's rowers, and served as a religious leader of sorts. He played music at Jason and Medea's wedding, and led the Argonauts in prayer multiple times throughout the story, including once to Apollo, a god he himself would worship to the end of his days. His most pivotal moment, however, was to fight back against these silky-voiced sirens by playing his lyre even more loudly and beautifully than the mermaids could sing, allowing the sailors to ignore their song and continue their journey to find the Golden Fleece. However, the best-known part of Orpheus' history was that of his relationship with his wife, Eurydice. Orpheus and Eurydice were madly in love, but weren't married for long. On the day of their wedding, Eurydice was bitten by a venomous snake and died shortly thereafter. Orpheus grieved her profusely, and then resolved that he would bring her back to the land of the living. He descended to the underworld using his lute, crossing the river Styx and descending upon Hades himself. Orpheus pleaded with the ruler of the underworld for his wife's life, reminding him that, eventually, they would both wind up in the underworld anyways, so why not let her live just a little while longer? Moved by Orpheus' words and his music, the King of the Dead relented, releasing Eurydice's soul on one condition. Orpheus could not look at her until they had returned to the surface. The two climbed in silence for some time, but eventually, Orpheus' anxiety got the best of him, and he turned back to look at his wife. One final time. The second his eyes set upon her, she fell back down to Hades, with her final word to her husband being farewell. Distraught, Orpheus tried to chase after her, but Charon, the ferryman of the Styx, would not let him cross back into Hades' domain. He stayed on the banks of the Styx for a week, before finally making his way back to the surface. Orpheus never again found love in a woman, though it seems he did have an interest in men as well. According to the poet Phanicles, Orpheus was absolutely smitten by Calais, demigod son of the north wind Boreas, and a fellow Argonaut. Ovid, a Roman poet and most noted teller of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, said that after Eurydice's death, Orpheus forswore the love of woman, but instead spent the remaining 3 years of his life engaging in pedastry, which I'm not going to explain here. If you really want to know more, then do your own research. Orpheus would later be killed, according to some sources, by women who worshipped Dionysus. For most of his life, Orpheus himself had also worshipped Dionysus above all other gods, but in the latter years, changed this allegiance to Apollo. This angered Dionysus, and led to the command to end Orpheus' life, where his entire body, save his head, was decimated. Orpheus went on to become the center of his own religious movement, known as the Orphic Mysteries, which venerated those who had gone to the underworld and returned, including Orpheus, Dionysus, and Persephone. Orpheus' perception as a person who has conquered death is extremely important in regards to his representation in the Persona series. Speaking of, going forward, I'm going to be spoiling major elements of Persona 3's story. So if you haven't played the game yet, I suggest you go and do that, put this video in your watch later list, and come back to, watch it later. If, on the other hand, you've already played the game, or you really just don't care, then you're welcome to hang out. In Persona 3, Orpheus represents the protagonist overcoming their fear of death. In reality, that's what the whole game is a metaphor for. It opens with the statement, Memento Mori. Remember that you are mortal. Remember you will die. Throughout the game, imagery of death is thrown at us from everywhere. Using evokers to summon your persona is purposefully reminiscent of committing suicide via firearm. Most of the major bosses are aspects of the incarnation of death. Death itself literally sits inside the protagonist's mind, sealed there by Aigis a decade before the events of the game. Orpheus specifically is connected to death as well. Not only does death serve as almost a second main persona for the protagonist in the form of Thanatos, but upon completing every social link, they evolve Orpheus into Orpheus Telos, a name which, when translated, means Orpheus of the End. It is a form of Orpheus, and thus the protagonist, that has accepted their end, their own death. When fused with Thanatos, the Greek god of death and the final persona of the Death Arcana, Orpheus becomes Messiah, the most powerful persona in the game, and the protagonist's true form. In taking on Messiah, the protagonist recognizes they must die to save all of humanity, an act which they make final in the game's finale, where they sacrifice their own life to seal Nyx and prevent her from destroying the planet. In doing so, they symbolize mastery over death, and fully step into the role of Orpheus. Orpheus' design is very human, reflecting the fact that he too was once merely a human. However, only his head looks natural, as the rest of his body seems more robotic. This is reflective of Orpheus' mythological death, where his body was destroyed in its entirety with the exception of his head. The rest of the body needed to be rebuilt in order for him to take form. He also has a lyre on his back to represent Orpheus' famed musical talents. The rest of his design, though, takes more from Persona 3 than it does mythology. If you look at Makoto and Orpheus side by side, visual similarities, especially around the face, become clear. Orpheus was designed to look like the protagonist. This fact is driven home even more when playing as the female protagonist, as Orpheus actually changes gender to reflect this version of the hero. Orpheus would also go on to become the main persona of Aigis in the epilogue to Persona 3, The Answer. This is due to the protagonist's influence on her, and her care for them, and is likely part of her grieving process in accepting the protagonist's death. She also ends up accepting Thanatos and Messiah as her personas as well, and being gifted the wild card. This doesn't seem to be a long-term thing though, as when we see her again in Persona 4 Arena, she has returned to using her original persona, Athena, who we'll cover in a later video. And that's a breakdown of Orpheus, and in general the themes of Persona 3. I hope you liked what you learned, and if you want to see more, subscribe to the channel, talk to me in the comments, join the Discord, all of that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.